She was just a little girl, her hands smeared with grease, standing beside a broken-down Mustang on the side of the road. To most people, she was invisible, too poor, too young, and too black for anyone to care. But on this day, fate placed her in the path of a man who had everything: money, power, respect. A millionaire with a reputation for never needing anyone's help. When their worlds collided, it seemed like a simple act of kindness, a child helping a man fix his car. But hidden beneath the dirt on her hands and the innocence in her eyes was something no one expected. Something that carried a story far bigger than the broken Mustang. Because when the man's gaze shifted to her hand, and he saw the ring on her tiny finger, everything changed. Why did a poor little girl have a ring that powerful men would kill to possess? And what truth was about to be uncovered in the most unlikely place? It was a quiet morning in a forgotten corner of the city, where cracked sidewalks and rusted fences told the story of a neighborhood left behind. Among the faded houses and abandoned lots lived a little girl named Amara. She was no stranger to struggle. Every day before school, while most children her age played with dolls or watched cartoons, Amara would wake before dawn to help her grandmother, sweeping the porch, fetching water, sometimes even fixing old tools that nobody else bothered with. Life had made her resourceful, far beyond her years. Where others saw junk, she saw possibility. An old bicycle wheel became a toy. A bent screwdriver became a tool she could use. Her world was simple, but she carried herself with quiet strength, as if refusing to let hardship define her. Yet, to the outside world, Amara was invisible. Teachers rarely remembered her name. Store owners eyed her with suspicion, as though her very presence meant trouble. And still, she endured, pushing forward with the kind of resilience that only comes from living in the shadows. Cars would speed down the road outside her house, most of them shiny and new, carrying people who would never step foot in her neighborhood. To them, this place was a blur in the rearview mirror, best left behind. But Amara noticed everything. She watched the polished cars, their gleaming paint catching the sunlight, and wondered what it must feel like to sit inside one, to be seen, to be valued. One car in particular always caught her attention, a classic Mustang, roaring past with a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the ground beneath her feet. She didn't know who it belonged to, only that it represented a different world, a world where dreams were possible. Amara's life was not filled with luxuries, but with unspoken lessons. She had learned early that people would judge her not by her kindness or her intelligence, but by the color of her skin and the poverty stamped on her clothes. She had learned to lower her gaze when others stared too long, to remain quiet when whispers followed her through the store. She knew the rules of survival in a world that had decided she was less. But there was something different about her too, something that set her apart even here, in a place where survival was the only dream. On her finger rested a ring. It was small, almost too big for her, and far too beautiful to belong in a place like this. It had been given to her years ago, a gift from someone her grandmother never spoke of. To Amara, it wasn't jewelry. It was a mystery, a reminder that her story might be bigger than the world she lived in. Most days, the ring went unnoticed. Just a glint of silver beneath the dirt of daily chores. But on that day, fate would make sure it was seen. The morning began like any other, with Amara wandering down the street, her satchel slung over her shoulder. She was on her way to buy a few groceries with the coins her grandmother had managed to save. Her path took her past the very road where cars often broke down, a stretch of cracked asphalt known for swallowing tires and stranding drivers who had no idea what kind of place they had wandered into. That was where the Mustang appeared again. Only this time, it wasn't speeding past. Its hood was up, smoke curling from the engine, and beside it stood a man whose polished shoes and expensive watch looked out of place against the broken pavement. A man who clearly belonged to the other side of the city, the side Amara had only ever imagined. At first, she almost walked past. Why would someone like him notice someone like her? But then, something inside her paused. The car, the symbol she had admired from afar, was wounded. The man, despite his wealth, looked frustrated, lost. And though she was only a child, Amara knew engines. She knew tools. She knew struggle. She stopped. And in that moment, two worlds collided, one born of privilege, the other of survival. A meeting that seemed like chance, but would soon reveal a truth far bigger than either of them could have imagined. Because by the time this day ended, that man would no longer see just a poor little girl from a forgotten street. He would see the ring. And with it, a story powerful enough to challenge everything he thought he knew. The man stood by his car, his expensive suit catching the morning light, his face etched with frustration. He looked like someone who was used to control, someone who wasn't used to being stranded, least of all in a neighborhood like this. The Mustang's hood was open, smoke seeping into the air, and yet despite the wealth in his appearance, he seemed helpless against the machine in front of him. Amara hesitated at the corner. She knew how people like him saw girls like her, too poor to matter, too black to belong anywhere near a man of his standing. Still, something in her pushed her forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the faint hope that by helping, she could prove that she was more than the world believed. She stepped closer. At first, he didn't notice her, his eyes fixed on the engine, his phone in hand, searching for a solution that wouldn't come. Finally, his gaze shifted, and it landed on her. For a brief moment, silence stretched between them. He raised an eyebrow, almost amused, almost dismissive. And then he said the words Amara had heard too many times before, words that cut without shouting. "This isn't a place for you." But Amara didn't flinch. She pointed to the car, to the steam hissing from the engine. "Your radiator's shut," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the weight of his stare. "If you keep trying to run it, it'll blow." He blinked, taken aback. The arrogance in his posture faltered just slightly. He asked how she knew, and she told him, about the hours spent fixing broken machines with nothing but scraps, about the way sound and smoke told stories to anyone willing to listen. He studied her for a moment longer, perhaps weighing whether to trust her. Then, reluctantly, he stepped aside. Amara leaned into the engine bay, her small hands moving with confidence. She worked quickly, improvising, using nothing but what she could find in the street and her satchel. And slowly, impossibly, the Mustang came back to life. The man's face softened, his pride bruised but his curiosity piqued. He asked her name. She answered. And for the first time that morning, he truly looked at her, not as a child, not as a stranger, but as someone who had given him something his wealth could not buy. But just as the tension began to ease, another presence entered the scene. A patrol car rolled to a stop at the corner, its lights flashing even though no crime had been committed. Two officers stepped out, their hands resting on their belts. Their eyes didn't linger on the millionaire. They went straight to Amara. "What's going on here?" one of them barked. Amara froze. Her stomach dropped, her body instinctively tensing. She had seen this before, how suspicion always found her first, how danger followed her skin. The millionaire began to speak, explaining that she had helped him, that she had fixed his car. But the officers barely listened. One of them stepped closer, towering over her. "You trying to steal something, girl?" The word struck like a whip. Amara opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came. Her hands trembled, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of the ring on her finger, its cold metal pressing into her skin as though reminding her of its presence. The millionaire stepped forward, his voice sharper now. "She's not stealing. She saved me. Do you understand? Without her, I'd still be stranded." But the officers weren't interested in the truth. Their eyes narrowed, their questions growing harsher, their tone dripping with accusation. Amara's heart pounded. She had done nothing wrong, and yet in their gaze, she was already guilty. And then, it happened. One of the officers grabbed her wrist, pulling her hand up. That's when they saw it, the ring. Their eyes flickered with recognition, confusion, then something darker. They exchanged a glance, one filled with unspoken meaning. Suddenly, their tone shifted. They weren't just questioning a child anymore, they were confronting something they couldn't quite place, something that unsettled them. The millionaire noticed it too. His gaze fell on the ring, and for the first time, his confidence cracked. He asked where she had gotten it. His voice wasn't cruel, but it carried urgency, almost desperation. Amara pulled her hand back, clutching it to her chest. The memory of her grandmother's warning echoed in her mind. Never take it off. Never tell them where it came from. Her silence only deepened the tension. The officers leaned in, pressing harder, their questions sharp and invasive. The millionaire, torn between gratitude and suspicion, demanded answers. And Amara, caught between fear and defiance, stood her ground. But in that moment, the world around her shifted. She wasn't just a poor girl anymore. She wasn't just invisible. That ring had turned her into something else, something that powerful men suddenly feared, and others might try to take. The confrontation escalated quickly. Voices rose. Crowds began to gather, drawn by the flashing lights and the sight of a child being cornered. Some whispered, others shouted, a few recorded with their phones. The injustice was plain to see, yet the weight of authority pressed down on Amara like a storm. And just when it seemed the situation might spiral out of control, the millionaire did something unexpected. He placed himself between Amara and the officers, his voice booming with a conviction he hadn't shown before. Enough, he said. If you want answers, you'll take them from me. She's coming with me. The officers hesitated, caught between their prejudice and the undeniable influence of the man before them. After a tense silence, they backed down, though not without a final warning glance at Amara. The patrol car pulled away, leaving behind an air heavy with suspicion and unease. The millionaire turned back to Amara. His eyes no longer carried dismissal. They carried questions, urgency, and perhaps even fear. He wanted to know about the ring, about her life, about how someone like her could carry something so valuable, so dangerous. But Amara only shook her head. Some truths were too dangerous to speak. And so, their uneasy alliance began, not born of trust, but of necessity. The man needed to understand what he had seen. Amara needed to survive. And somewhere between them, the ring pulsed with a story that refused to stay hidden. What neither of them knew was that this was only the beginning. Because the deeper they went, the more the world around them would turn hostile. The ring was not just a piece of jewelry, it was a key. A key to a past soaked in injustice, and a future that powerful forces would do anything to control. The road ahead would test them both. It would force the millionaire to confront the comfort of his privilege, and Amara to face the cruel reality that the world wasn't ready to let her rise. And as they took their first steps away from that broken-down Mustang, the shadows around them grew longer. Because once the ring had been seen, there was no turning back. The city at night was never quiet. Sirens echoed in the distance, car horns cut through the air, and yet amidst the chaos, there was an eerie stillness that clung to Amara and the millionaire as they walked. The Mustang followed slowly behind them, repaired but fragile, much like the fragile trust between the two of them. The ring still glimmered faintly on Amara's finger. She tried to tuck her hand away, but the man noticed every time. His eyes kept flicking to it, questions pressing against his lips. He wanted to ask where it came from, what it meant, but every time he opened his mouth, the memory of the police officer's reaction stopped him cold. Whatever truth lay behind that ring, it wasn't simple. Word had already begun to spread. Videos from bystanders were circulating online, short clips of a poor black girl being cornered by officers, a millionaire stepping in, a mysterious piece of jewelry catching the light. By the time they reached the heart of the city, whispers had grown into headlines. And with headlines came attention. Attention that was not safe. They felt it before they saw it, the eyes watching from alleys, the way people turned their heads as they passed. Some looked at Amara with pity. Others with suspicion. And a few with something far more dangerous, greed. The millionaire suggested taking her somewhere safe, a hotel, perhaps even his home. But Amara refused. Safe in his world was never safe in hers. She insisted they find her grandmother instead. Reluctantly, he agreed. The streets narrowed as they made their way back toward her neighborhood, the streetlights flickering like warnings. That's when it happened. A black SUV rolled up beside them, its windows tinted, its engine humming with menace. The doors opened, and men stepped out, dressed in suits, their faces hard, their movements deliberate. These were not police officers. They were something else. One of them spoke, his voice calm but cold. "We'll take the girl." The millionaire stepped in front of Amara instinctively. "She's not going anywhere." The men exchanged a glance, and then their eyes fell on the ring. One of them smirked. "That belongs to us." Amara's heart pounded. She clutched her hand to her chest, shaking her head. "No. It's mine." The air grew thick with tension. The men began to close in, their presence suffocating. The millionaire tried to reason with them, but it was useless. They didn't care about explanations. They wanted the ring, and they would take it by force if necessary. And then the world exploded into chaos. One of the men lunged, grabbing for Amara's wrist. She fought back, her small frame thrashing wildly, refusing to let go. The millionaire swung, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. The sound of bone meeting flesh cracked through the night. Another man grabbed the millionaire, slamming him against the SUV. Amara screamed, the sound piercing, raw, desperate. People on the street began to gather again, drawn by the noise. Phones lifted into the air, recording, documenting. But instead of helping, the crowd only deepened the spectacle. The men didn't flinch at the cameras. They had power, influence, enough to make sure that whatever happened here could be erased. Amara's vision blurred with tears as she struggled. She thought of her grandmother, of the warnings whispered late at night, "That ring carries blood. That ring carries history. Protect it with your life." And here she was, just a child, caught in the grip of forces far larger than she could comprehend, fighting to keep hold of the one thing that tethered her to her identity. The millionaire fought back with a desperation he had never known. For the first time in his life, money and status meant nothing. All he had was his strength, his will to protect a child who had been invisible to him just hours ago. But the men were relentless. One of them pulled a weapon, not a gun, but a taser, crackling with electricity. The crowd gasped. The millionaire froze, his body trembling as the current struck him, sending him collapsing to the ground. Amara shrieked, her voice breaking. She tried to run, but another hand caught her arm, yanking her backward. The ring glinted in the streetlight as the man tried to pull it from her finger. She resisted, her nails clawing, her body twisting. And then, suddenly, the ring cut him. A single drop of blood fell to the pavement, dark and startling against the concrete. The man recoiled, his face twisted in pain. For a moment, everything stopped. The other men stared at the blood, their expressions flickering with something that looked almost like fear. Amara seized the chance. She bolted, breaking free from their grip, running toward the crowd. Her chest burned, her legs ached, but she didn't stop. The millionaire staggered to his feet, chasing after her despite the pain. The men followed, their pursuit merciless. The chase tore through the streets, weaving past shops, alleys, and bystanders who watched in stunned silence. Amara's heart raced. She could feel the weight of the ring, heavy, almost burning against her skin. What was it about this piece of metal that drove men to violence? They reached the edge of the neighborhood, the same cracked sidewalks and broken fences that Amara had always called home. But tonight, they no longer felt familiar. They felt like a battlefield. The men closed in. The millionaire shouted for Amara to keep running, his voice hoarse, urgent. She turned back and saw him fighting again, struggling against two attackers. His face was bloodied, his suit torn, but his determination burned bright. And then, sirens. Police cars flooded the street, lights flashing, sirens wailing. Relief washed over Amara for a moment. But that relief shattered when she saw the faces of the officers. The same suspicion, the same disdain. Their eyes didn't fall on the suited men with weapons. They fell on her. The chaos froze. The men in suits straightened, their demeanor calm, almost smug. The officers stepped out, and instead of questioning them, they pointed to Amara. "There she is," one officer barked. "Hands where we can see them." Amara's stomach dropped. Her body shook. She raised her hands slowly, the ring glinting under the harsh lights. The millionaire tried to intervene, shouting that she was the victim, that they were chasing her, that she had saved him. But the officers shoved him aside, pinning him against a patrol car. His protests drowned beneath their commands. Amara stood frozen, her small frame trembling, her breath ragged. The crowd watched, phones recording again, capturing every second. And yet she knew, truth didn't matter here. Evidence didn't matter. All that mattered was the story those in power chose to tell. One officer stepped closer, his hand on his holster. His voice was sharp, commanding. "Drop it," he said. Amara looked down at the ring, shining defiantly against the darkness. For a moment, it felt alive in her hand, as if carrying the voices of those who had worn it before her. She thought of her grandmother, of the generations who had been silenced, erased, forgotten. Tears blurred her vision, but she stood her ground. She couldn't drop it. Not now. Not ever. The officer's hand tightened on his holster. The crowd gasped. The air grew still, heavy, unyielding. Every second stretched into eternity. And in that moment, Amara realized, this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who had been invisible, everyone who had been silenced, everyone who had carried injustice in their veins. She closed her eyes, clutching the ring with both hands, her body trembling but unbroken. And then, a single command cut through the night. Take the shot. Time seemed to stop. The crowd held its breath, phones frozen mid-recording, hearts pounding in unison. Amara stood trembling, clutching the ring to her chest. The officer's hand hovered on his weapon. The millionaire, bloodied and pinned to the patrol car, screamed for them to stop. For one unbearable moment, the world teetered on the edge of tragedy. And then, something shifted. From within the crowd, voices began to rise. First one, then another, then dozens. Shouting. Pleading. Demanding. Don't you dare. She's just a child. We're watching. Phones were lifted higher, lights flashing, the collective will of strangers pressing against the power of the uniform. The officer hesitated. His hand tightened, then loosened. His eyes flicked to the cameras, to the crowd, to the faces that would not look away. The silence cracked. The command was not carried out. Amara collapsed to her knees, tears spilling freely. The millionaire wrenched himself free, pulling her into his arms. She shook uncontrollably, clutching the ring as if it were the only thing tethering her to life. The SUV men melted into the shadows, their presence vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. But the damage was done. The story was no longer theirs to control. It belonged to everyone who had witnessed it. That night, the footage spread like wildfire. Across phones, across news stations, across borders. Millions watched as a child was nearly silenced for no crime greater than existing in the wrong skin, in the wrong place, wearing the wrong history on her finger. Some denied what they saw. Others excused it. But countless more felt the weight of truth pressing on their conscience. Amara did not sleep. Neither did the millionaire. They sat together in the small, weathered home of her grandmother, the air thick with grief and questions. He asked again about the ring, and this time, the truth came in fragments, how it had belonged to ancestors who had been enslaved, how it had been passed down through generations, how it carried the memory of struggle and the hope of freedom. It was more than metal. It was legacy. And suddenly, the millionaire understood. That ring, on the finger of a poor black girl, threatened to expose everything society had tried to bury, history, injustice, the bloodlines of pain that wealth and privilege were built upon. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a mirror. And too many were afraid of what they might see in it. The days that followed were a blur. Investigations were launched, statements were issued, officials scrambled to protect reputations. The officers insisted they had followed protocol. The suited men denied ever being there. But the footage told a story that could not be erased. And Amara, once invisible, was now a name on every screen, a face in every conversation. But fame is not the same as freedom. For Amara, the fear remained. The sound of the command echoed in her dreams. The memory of hands grabbing her wrist, of tasers sparking, of suspicion filling the air, those scars would not fade. The millionaire tried to protect her, but even he realized the limits of his influence. Money could fix cars, buy houses, silence rumors. But it could not erase the truth of her existence in a world that had already decided her worth. Yet through the fear, something else began to grow. Strength. Resolve. Amara no longer saw herself as invisible. She carried the weight of generations on her hand, and now, the eyes of the world had seen it too. This was no longer just her story. It was the story of countless others, children stopped in the street, families broken by bias, lives cut short by prejudice. The ring was hers, but the struggle was shared. And so, Amara chose not to hide. She walked into the light, into the noise, into the uncomfortable conversations that others tried to avoid. She told her story, again and again, until the echoes of her voice reached places she had once believed untouchable. But still, the question lingers, was it enough? Because while Amara's life was spared that night, how many others were not? While her story was captured on camera, how many more went unseen? How many commands were carried out in the silence, without witnesses, without justice, without truth? Her story is not a singular tragedy. It is a reflection, a mirror held up to the world, daring us to look. To see the systems that protect the powerful and endanger the powerless. To confront the uncomfortable truth that racism is not history, but reality. And so, as the screen fades, we are left with a choice. To scroll past, to shake our heads and move on, or to stop, to listen, to act. Because Amara's story may be one you've just watched. But out there, beyond the screen, countless others are still unfolding. And the question we must all ask ourselves is this. How many more rings must be seen, how many more children must tremble, how many more voices must cry out, before the world finally listens?